In remarks on the House floor Wednesday, Representative Zoe Lofgren supported a bill to reform the Electoral Count Act. The bill would modernize the 1887 Electoral Count Act and clarify the role of the vice president as purely ministerial, after President Trump attempted to force Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the 2020 election. The California Democrat urged fellow lawmakers to support, quote, this critical effort to protect American democracy and to ensure, in President Lincoln's words at Gettysburg, that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people long endures.
Madam Speaker, I think it's important to talk about the January 6th Select Committee. Since its creation more than a year ago, the Select Committee has given substantial attention to the issues related to the Electoral Count Act and its need for reform. Let's recall that in addition to finding out all the facts about the events leading up to January 6th, the Select Committee is tasked with recommending changes in the law or in procedures that will prevent such an occurrence in the future. The Select Committee has devoted multiple public hearings over more than 4.5 hours to issues related to the Electoral Count Act and the former president's efforts to overturn the election on January 6th. During these hearings, the committee heard from at least 4 witnesses regarding the Electoral College votes and other issues related to the act. Importantly, conservative judge Michael Luttig, who is a legal expert and was served in the Reagan administration and appointed by President George H.W. Bush to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, testified before the Select Committee that the Electoral Count Act, quote, is not only a work in progress for the country, but at this moment in history, an important work in progress that needs to take place. He testified with reference to the Electoral Count Act that, quote, Donald Trump and his allies and supporters are a clear and present danger to American democracy. Now, why is that? Because even though the presiding officer of the Senate, the vice president, has never had more than a ministerial role to play in the counting of the votes, the former president told people that he could change the outcome. He said so in his speech, he said so in tweets, he threatened the vice president, and we saw that that armed mob that came here to attack us believed what the former president said. In fact, they read aloud the tweets as he delivered them, and how Mike Pence had disappointed him. You know, Judge Luttig said this about the bill that Ms. Cheney and I have introduced. Had this bill, the Presidential Election Reform Act, been the law during the 2020 presidential election, there never would have been the fateful January 6th that the country witnessed and experienced that day. He also went on to say, this bill is masterfully drafted. Now, why would he say that? Well, it is, but we also sought his considered judgment and expertise as we crafted this bill. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put in the record his statements on this.
Without objection.
You know, this is a bill that has been well received across the political spectrum. You know, we got a Wall Street Journal report saying the good news is that the House now has a bill to update the 1887 Electoral Count Act, and they go on to say there's no excuse for Congress's delay in fixing this invitation to political trouble. I was very happy to get that support from that organization, from the Wall Street Journal, but we also got kudos from Cato, that well-known conservative institution, that they say this bill is actually more conservative and originalist as compared to other measures. It's not every day that the Center for American Progress and the Cato Institute see it the same way, but they do in this case. Both organizations, right to left, agree that this is an appropriate step to take and that it will help make our country safer. I just want to address a couple of other issues before closing. First, it's unfortunate that my friend Mr. Davis has said something that's clearly inaccurate. In the bill itself, it defines what is a disaster. It's not somebody saying, gosh, there's COVID. It is a tightly defined set of catastrophes that will be decided by a federal three-judge panel and would be limited just in time and scope so that people could have their votes cast and counted. I also wanted to address something I think is very unfortunate, the suggestion that somehow I had a role in trying to overturn the election in Iowa. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Federal Contested Election Act says this: a candidate challenging an election is required within 30 days after the result of their election to file with the clerk and serve upon the contestee written notice of the intention to contest election. Once that's done, it's assigned to the House Administration Committee. It wasn't my idea, that's what our rules say. And there's a process that has to be undertaken. Now, we didn't finish that process because the contestee withdrew, which was her right, and frankly, I was glad that the matter was terminated, but that's just what the law requires. I want to just make a final comment about the objections under this proposed law. It's true that members of both sides of the aisle have randomly objected to certification of the Electoral College. I think, honestly, that's unfortunate. But we never saw a majority of one party vote to overturn the election as we did in January 6th of 2020. What this bill would do would be to make sure you could never have those kind of objections in the future. We did some research. We believe that under our bill, not a single objection in the last 100 years would have been allowed under this bill. The last example was a disagreement in 1873 about whether a candidate who'd passed away after the election still qualified as a person for Article 2 purposes. That would be covered under the limited set. But this would put an end to using frivolous challenges to the electoral count. And that's another good reason why we should pass this bill today. You know, 234 years ago, the authors of the Federalist paper asked this: who are to be the electors of the federal representatives? Not the rich more than the poor, not the learned more than the ignorant, not the haughty heirs of distinguished names more than the humble sons of obscurity. The electors are to be the great body of the people of the United States. That is a message that resonates to this day. This bill will ensure that the voice of the American people is the final word on the future of our republic. All told, the reforms in this bill confine Congress to its true, narrow role in presidential elections under the 12th Amendment. I hope and trust that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will join us in this critical effort to protect American democracy and to ensure, in President Lincoln's words at Gettysburg, that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people long endures. I urge all my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.